lamp or a LED lamp or whatever is very small to really cause a change in the medium's response characteristics. The reason is like this: the electric field inside an atom is typically of the order of uh, 10 to the power 10 volts per meter. How do we know that? We know that the energy difference between, say, two levels, uh, uh, two energy levels of an electron inside an atom is of the order of 1 electron volt, 1 or 2 electron volts. This is a typical energy difference between two levels, say two successive levels. And the separation between these levels is of the order of an angstrom. So if you divide, so the if the energy difference is say 1 electron volt, then you can say that the potential difference is 1 volt. So if there is potential difference of 1 volt over a distance of 1 angstrom, that means that the electric field is 10 to the power 10 volts per meter, because an 1 angstrom is equal to 10 to the power minus 10 meters. So the electric field is of the order of 10 to the power 10 volts per meter, whereas the electric field associated with ordinary light rays is only about 10 to the power 3 volts per meter. So it is insignificantly small compared to the electric field produced by the nucleus. And therefore, the response of an atom to an electric field is basically linear. What do I mean by response? For example, if you put, um, say, something like a hydrogen atom uh, inside or subject a hydrogen atom to an external electric field, then the hydrogen atom develops a dipole moment. This is this is referred to as electronic polarizability. And why it happens, I have demonstrated in a note that I sent you last night. Can you show us that slide, Shivshant?
Yes, sir.
The handwritten note I sent last. I sent you a handwritten note. Uh, Actually, I sent you two such notes. Yes, the next one, the last slide that I sent you. This one, right. So I have done a small calculation uh, of electronic polarizability. So what you have here on the left hand side is like the classical model of an atom. Of, you can say this is the Bohr model. In the Bohr model, there's a nucleus with charge Ze, and suppose an electron is orbiting the nucleus. There is no electric field, and assume that the orbit is circular. Then for uh, circular orbit or equilibrium uh, over a circular orbit, the condition is that L square by m uh, r0 cube should be equal to z square by r0 square. This is the same as mv square by r equal to z square by r square, that same condition. But L is the angular momentum. You can write it like this. Now suppose you apply an electric field as shown on the right hand figure. The electric field is directed from right to left, say, and suppose it is uniform. So under this electric field, the electron would be attracted to the right, because the electron will tend to move in a direction opposite to the electric field. So what happens is that the orbit becomes a non-circular, something like an elliptical orbit, not exactly ellipse, but an oval-shaped orbit. So on the left of the nucleus, the point of the orbit on the axis of this oval is known as the this is the nearest point, or uh, in planetary physics you would call this perihelion. So this is the peri position, and the distance of this from the nucleus is r1. On the right hand side, the electron when it crosses the axis of the ellipse or the oval is at a distance r2 from the nucleus. Now let us try to calculate r1 and r2. So as the incident electric field, rather the uh, superimposed electric field does not change the angular momentum, so L remains constant or conserved. So then the equations are L square by m r1 cube equal to E into E plus Z E square by r1 square. Here on the left hand side, the electric field E exerts a force on the electron in the same direction as the force exerted by the nucleus. So the two forces add up. On the right hand side, the two forces are opposite to each other, and therefore I have L square by m r2 square equal to Z E square by r2 square minus E times E. Now suppose, because the electric field usually is very small compared to the electric field produced by the nucleus, I can assume that R1 is only a small change from R0. So I write R1 equal to R0 minus X1. So writing in that way and assuming that X1 is very small compared to R0, I can make several approximations and arrive at an expression for X1 which depends linearly on the imposed electric field capital E. Similarly, I can calculate an X2 which is the change from R0 on the right hand side. So X2 is the expression given there. So now if you can scroll down slightly, scroll down, lower portion. So what is the mean displacement? The mean displacement is x1 plus x2 by 2, because note that the displacement is in the same direction, both for the peri position and the ap position. The displacement is in the same direction, that is to the right. So the mean displacement is a sum of x1 and x2 divided by 2. And so as you can easily see, this displacement is proportional to the imposed electric field capital E. This displacement causes a shift of the center of negative charge, which was coinciding with the position of the nucleus earlier, to shift to a position at a distance equal to x1 plus x2 by 2, that is delta x, from the nucleus. So now the atom develops a dipole moment because the center of positive charge and center of negative charge are now different, and so it has a dipole moment, and the dipole moment is E times delta x, that is the electron's charge times delta x, and which is equal to some proportionality constant times the imposed electric field. So the dipole moment that has now arisen because of the superposition of this electric field E is proportional to E. So you say that the medium has responded linearly to the imposed electric field because uh, the induced dipole moment is proportional to the applied electric field E. From this, you can also calculate the dipole moment per unit volume if you know the number of atoms per unit volume. So that would be just n times alpha E. In other words, P capital P, which is the polarizability, is equal to, or rather capital P, which is the polarization, is proportional to the imposed electric field. However, if x1 and x2 are not too small compared to R0, you have to make uh, uh, full expansion of the quantities 1 minus x1 by r0 to the minus 3 and so on, and you will have terms proportional to x1 cube, x1 square, x1 cube, etc. Similarly, you will have terms proportional to x2 square, x2 cube, etc. for the app position, and then because of the presence of x1 square and x 1 cube, etc., the polarization or the uh, induced dipole moment will not be a linear function of E, but there would be other terms proportional to E square, E cube, etc. So now you say that the medium has responded non-linearly to the superposed electric field, because the induced dipole moment is not simply proportional to the uh, superposed electric field, but there are terms proportional to square of capital E and cube of capital E, etc. So that will happen only if x1 and x2 are not very small compared to R0. In other words, the electric field is very strong, comparable in some sense to the electric field produced by the nucleus. So that is what is meant by linear response and non-linear response. So now you can close this page and go back to the first page of the chapter nonlinear optics. Yes. So, uh, so if you scroll down slightly, now what is the kind of electric field that is associated with a laser beam? Suppose a laser beam has a power of 10 to the power 6 watt, and the cross sectional area of the beam is 1 millimeter square. Then what is the intensity? The intensity of the beam is 10 to the power 6, that is 1 megawatt, divided by the area 1 millimeter square, that means 10 to the power minus 6 meter square. So the intensity of the beam is 10 to the power 12 watt per meter square. Now note that the expression for the intensity is equal to half of C, that is the velocity of light, into epsilon 0, that is the permittivity of vacuum, into square of the electric field. This electric field is the amplitude of the oscillating electric field associated with the laser beam. So 10 to the power 12 watt per meter square is equal to half into velocity of light, that is 3 into 10 to the power 8 meters per second, into epsilon 0, which is equal to 8.85 into 10 to the power minus 12 in MI units, and times E square. So if you finish the calculations, you will find that this electric field is now of the order of 10 to the power 8 volts per meter. So it is much larger than the 10 to the power 3 volts per meter associated with ordinary light rays, but still it is smaller than the electric field produced by the nucleus, which, as we have seen earlier, is of the order of 10 to the power 10 volts per meter. Now if you say take an even more intense laser beam, say something like 100 megawatt beam. Actually, this comes in the form of a pulse, not as a continuous beam, as we have seen in connection with continuous wave or CW lasers, like gas lasers or semiconductor lasers. The the power radiated by such continuous wave lasers is of the order of few milliwatts or few tens of milliwatts, except for the carbon dioxide laser, which we have not discussed in details, which delivers few tens of kilowatts continuously. But if you want a uh, uh, some power of the order of 10 to the power 6 or 10 to the power 8 watts, that is 100 megawatts, you have to use a pulse laser source like a ruby laser source. But the pulse exists for only a few hundred nanoseconds or few hundred, just 100 nanoseconds something. Anyway, if the power over a small interval is of the order of 100 megawatt, then as you can easily see, the electric field will now rise from 10 to the power 8 volts per meter to 10 to the power 9 volts per meter. So now it is uh, just an order of magnitude smaller than the electric field produced by the nucleus. And in this case, if we go back to this x1 and x2, we will find that x1 and x2 are no longer negligibly small compared to r0. So you have higher terms to take into account, x1 square, x2 square, x1 cube, x2 cube, like that. And then you will find that the higher powers of electric field will come in when you calculate the polarization vector. So that is how an intense beam of radiation, such as the beams associated with lasers, can modify the response characteristics of the medium from a linear one to a non-linear one. And when that happens, the medium is said to be a non-linear medium. The person who developed this subject is Professor Bloembergen, who was awarded the Nobel Prize for his work with nonlinear optics. So let us move to the bottom portion of this page. Shivshant, let us go to the bottom portion of this page. Yes. Yes, this. Yes, yes. Now, who first demonstrated this nonlinear characteristics? Well, a group headed by Franken first found this strange thing, that when they set up an arrangement as shown in the in figure 13.1, just show figure 13.1, Shivshant. Yes, yes, stop, yes. So they set up an arrangement like like the one shown in figure 13.1. You have a ruby laser source, which is a pulse laser source, as we know. Then you have a filter for ruby laser. We know that ruby laser emits laser radiation at wavelengths of 6943 and 6928 angstroms, of which the 6943 radiation is more intense. Here they have made a numerical mistake or misprint. 6493 is not the right number. It is 6943. 6943 angstroms is the wavelength of the laser light that comes out of the ruby laser source. So this goes through a filter for ruby laser. That means the filter allows the red light, because 6943 angstrom is in the red color region of light. So this red light, which is supposed to have frequency omega 1 as shown in the diagram, falls on a quartz crystal. The quartz crystal, as you know, is a uniaxial crystal. This means that the material inside this crystal has a non-isotropy property. So crystals which are uniaxial or biaxial are non-isotropic by nature. The properties are different if you look along different directions. So when this radiation falls on this type of crystal, so what they found out, let's discuss that first. So this radiation was allowed to pass through quartz, and then strangely they found that the radiation comprises of light of two different colors, or even laser beams of two different colors. One laser beam had the same color and the same frequency as the incident laser beam, that is, its color was red, but the other one had the frequency that is 2 times the frequency of the incident radiation, that is omega 2 is equal to 2 omega 1. So there's a doubling of frequency. Then what they did is put a UV filter in the path of these beams. The UV filter stops the red light but allows the violet light to go through. Note that if the frequency has doubled, the wavelength has become half. So from 6943 you go to 3471, which is in the deep violet, even ultraviolet region, just into the ultraviolet region. So this light comes out and you can hardly see it because it is so violet, but then you can detect it with a photocell, and you can, using a spectrometer, find the wavelength. So they found that the wavelength is 3741 angstroms, which is just half the wavelength of the incident radiation, which at wavelength of 6943 angstroms. So this was a very strange thing. Something strange has happened that did not ever uh, was seen to happen with ordinary red light from a non-laser source. So the laser beam must have caused some uh, changes in the properties of quartz, because of which this secondary radiation of frequency omega 2 has arisen. And we have now to explain why this has happened. Okay, so let us move to the lower portion of page 2. Yes, so what is the explanation? So the explanation is firstly like this: you have the polarization vector P, which is the sum of the dipole moments of the individual atoms inside the uh, material, say quartz or some other crystal or whatever material it may be. So capital P is sum over the dipole moments of individual atoms inside the material medium, and this is of course the sum is over atoms within a unit volume. So let us move little downwards, lower portion of the page. Yes, just keep lowering it, lower it further, lower it further. Yes, you can stop here. Okay. Now, as I just said, for low intensity beams, the polarization vector is proportional to the electric field. We have just given you a calculation which demonstrated this, that the polarization vector is proportional to the electric field. Now, as I mentioned a little while ago, if the electric field of the incident radiation is very strong, within a order of magnitude of the electric field produced by the nucleus, then you cannot stop at the first term, but you have to consider higher powers of E. So in equation 13.3, they have written down the general expression for the polarization vector, which is epsilon 0 into chi 1 E. Chi 1 is the same as the chi of equation 13.2, that is the linear response coefficient, but then you have factors like chi 2 e square plus chi 3 e cube and so on. So these take into account the corrections that you need if the electric field is so strong that you have to take into account the higher powers of x1 and x2, like x1 square x1 cube or x2 square x2 cube and so on. So that is how it comes. Okay, so one more point here. Notice that the uh, polarization is a vector quantity. In equation 13.3, they have written down an equation where you do not see this vector characteristic. You think it is a scalar quantity, and you write an expression where you don't see any vector signs. However, polarization is a vector quantity, and so uh, to be precise, you should write separate components of uh, expressions for separate components of P. Like on the left hand side, you write P subscript I. This means the I can be X, Y, or Z, so you can have Px, Py, or Pz. Whatever it is, suppose you want to write the expression for Pi, then on the right hand side, you will write epsilon 0 into, within brackets, not just x1 but x1 with subscripts ij multiplied by the jth component of the incident or imposed electric field ej, and then sum over j. So instead of just chi1 e, you will write sum over j chi1 ij into capital E j. Similarly, for the second term, you will write, instead of chi 2 e square, you will write sum over I, sum over, so I want for pi, so you write sum over jk of chi 2 ijk into epsilon j epsilon, sorry, this is electric field, so you write chi 2 ijk e j e k, and then take the sum over j and k. So this means that chi 1 is actually chi 1 ij, that means it is a tensor of rank 2, whereas chi 2 should actually be written as chi 2 ijk, that is a tensor of rank 3, and so on. So to be precise, you should write expressions such that the vector character of the polarization becomes very evident. In other words, you would write expression for pi, and that expression should be epsilon 0 into sum over j of chi 1 ij times ej plus sum over jk epsilon 2 ijk into ej ek plus something like this. So just uh, I have said this because in the next page we shall see that is exactly that something that they have written to elaborate on something. So let us move to the next page. Move to the next page.
Yes, sir. Uh, Second harmonic generation, right? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, sir. Second harmonic generation, right?
Yes. Just no, lower it, lower it. Yes, I want to see the top portion of this page. Just first show the top portion of this page. Okay. Now let us play along with equation 13.3. Let us forget the tensor character of chi 1 and chi 2 etc., but just play along as if these are scalar quantities. So now suppose this laser beam is passing through whatever medium, maybe quartz or calcite or whatever, or a liquid, and you want to see what is uh, the formula for the polarization vector. So the radiation um, incident radiation comprises of uh, uh, mutually perpendicular electric and magnetic fields, and they are both oscillatory. And let us write the electric field as E0 cos omega t. The corresponding magnetic field would be B0 cos omega t, but the magnetic field is of much less importance in determining the response characteristic of a medium. The electric field is much more important, so we never usually talk about the magnetic field. Okay, so just the electric field, E equal to E0 cos omega t. Let's see the next formula. Just raise this. Okay, so in the next formula they have written out the expression for capital P, which is the polarization, uh, in a longhand. So instead of just E, they have written E0 cos omega t, then E0 square cos square omega t, and then E0 cube cos cube omega t, and so on. Now what they have done is this. They want to write cos square omega t in terms of omega t. So they use the formula cos square theta equal to 1 plus cos 2 theta by 2, and then cos cube theta equal to cos 3 theta plus 3 cos theta by 4. These are formulas that are well known to you. So instead of cos square omega t, they can write 1 plus cos 2 omega t by 2, and instead of cos cube omega t, they have cos 3 omega t plus 3 cos omega t by 4. Then if you collect all the terms that have cos omega t as a factor, and then terms which have cos 2 omega t and so on, you arrive at expression 13.7. So the first term is half epsilon 0 chi2 E0 square. This is a constant term, and it doesn't affect the 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 way the medium responds to an oscillatory field. The oscillatory part has frequency cos omega t, then 2 cos omega t, and then 3 cos. Sorry, the oscillatory parts are the important parts. So you have cos omega t, then cos 2 omega t, and then cos 3 omega t. The cos omega t has a coefficient that is epsilon 0 chi 1 plus 3 by 4 chi 3 E0 square. Now you can see that if chi 3 is not too small, then the coefficient becomes a function of the amplitude of the incident electric field. Similarly, you have this quantities cos 2 omega t, that is a component with frequency that is 2 times as large as the frequency of the incident radiation. Then you also have a cos 3 omega t, that is a component with frequency 3 times as large as the frequency of the incident field. In other words, the medium is generating light of frequency 2 omega t and 3 omega t. Of course, light with frequency equal to the frequency of the incident radiation is also present. That is, the cos omega t term is also there. But now we see how this this experiment of Franken can be explained. In Franken's experiment, they found that the radiation coming out of the quartz crystal comprised of one component, that is frequency equal to omega 1, the other one with frequency twice omega 1. And now you can see from equation 13.c where that twice omega comes in. So this is the third term in that equation. If chi2 is not negligibly small, in other words, if chi2 E0 square is a quantity that you must take into consideration, then you see that the emergent radiation will have a component with frequency equal to twice omega. Of course, the intensity of the incident beam, or the beam that has frequency omega in the emergent radiation, will be much more intense than the one with frequency twice omega. Nevertheless, it would be possible to detect the second component as well, as Franken and collaborators were able to do. So that is how the system has responded non-linearly to the incident radiation. And this has happened because E0 is very large in comparison with the E0s that you have for ordinary light. It is because of this that although chi2 is small compared to chi1, still chi2 E0 square is not negligibly small. That is why you have this component with frequency twice omega. Okay, this twice omega component is called the second harmonic of polarization, and the thrice omega component is called the third harmonic of polarization. The one with frequency omega is of course the fundamental harmonic of polarization. So how is the second harmonic generated? We have just seen that the second harmonic of the harmonic with frequency 2 omega will arise if chi2 E0 square is sufficiently large that you cannot ignore that term. Now, if we go to the next equation, just scroll down, second harmonic generation, this phrase is sometimes shortened to the acronym SHG, second harmonic generation. So let's see how this, or whether this can happen in all media. So 13.8 is an expression for the uh, part of polarization that is associated with the uh, the square of the electric field, or to be more precise, where you have to take into account the product of Ej and Ek. So Pi2 is equal to epsilon 0 into chi ijk Ej Ek. I had mentioned this earlier, that because polarization is a vector quantity, in other words, tensor of rank 1, you have to write down the right hand side in such a way that it's also a tensor of rank 1. So you have here a tensor of rank 3 chi ijk multiplied by tensors of rank 1 Ej and Ek. So uh, if you want to be very correct with your notations, then if you write P subscript I and then chi subscript ijk, you would have to write E superscript j, E superscript k. So that way you would be correct as far as representing quantities in tensor notation is concerned, but we shall ignore this fine point. So you have this thing. Now let us consider a medium like a liquid or a gas. Now, in a liquid or a gas, there is no non-isotropy. Liquid and a gas have the same properties whichever direction you look within it. This means chi ijk does not depend on the direction. So suppose I choose a coordinate system for which the x direction is opposite to the previously chosen x direction, y is opposite to the previous y, z is opposite to the previous z. In other words, you have a coordinate system which is uh, which is uh, just a reflection of the old system about the origin. Such a change can of course, or is of course, produced by a parity operation. But uh, let's not introduce such terms. It's not necessary. What we want all to do is just change x to minus x, y to minus y, z to minus z. We can always choose such a system of coordinates. Now, if I do that, then the polarization vector will change sign. It will become minus Pi2, and the electric field components will also change sign, become minus Ej and minus Ek, because these are vector quantities. So under such change of coordinate systems, the signs of these quantities, the vector quantities, will change, right? The vectors which are tensors of rank 1 will change sign under such a coordinate transformation or parity operation. So let us go to the next page. So next page, let us raise the page, raise the display. Yes, okay. Now see, in equation 13.9, they show the effect of such a coordinate transformation. Pi has become minus Pi. They write Pi2 because they are trying to find out what way the second term in the expression for the polarization vector is changing. That is why the 2 is there. So minus Pi2 is equal to epsilon 0 sum over jk chi ijk to, what is it? Yeah, times Ej has changed sign, so it has become minus Ej. Ek has changed sign, minus Ek. But the product of two minuses is a plus, so the right hand side must be equal to Pi2 plus Pi2, because we have assumed that chi ijk does not depend on direction, and therefore a coordinate transformation will not affect the value of chi ijk, it remains the same. So if chi ijk remains the same, then the right hand side gives you plus pi2. So on the left hand side you have minus pi2 and that is equal to plus pi2. So this means that pi2 must be 0. And if pi2 is 0, identically equal to 0 for all components I, j and k, then it must follow that chi ijk2 is itself equal to 0. Okay. Whatever I may choose for ej and ek, I can change the direction of the electric field, or I can change the direction in which the uh, incident beam is falling on this medium, and therefore change the signs and values of ej and ek, but still pi2 will be 0, and that can happen only if chi ijk2 is equal to 0. This is not chi ijk square. The 2 in the uh, superscript position is actually 2 within brackets. Chi within brackets 2 ijk is equal to 0. So the second term in the expression for the polarization vector is identically equal to 0 for isotropic media like liquid or gas or crystals which are centrosymmetric. What it means is that uh, the crystal has the same properties to the right as to the left, to the above as to the below, and so on. So it is centrosymmetric. For centrosymmetric crystals, the second term of the polarization vector in the general expression 13.3 vanishes. The third term can be there, but the second term vanishes. Okay. For non-centrosymmetric crystals like quartz crystal, which is a uniaxial crystal, or calcite crystal, you have heard of calcite crystals in connection with Nicol prism. So calcite crystal or quartz crystal are uniaxial crystals. They have different properties in different directions, and that is why you have this phenomenon of birefringence or double refraction for such crystals. So crystals which have uh, non-isotropy or which are non-isotropic like quartz or calcite show the phenomenon of double refraction because of this non-isotropy. And for such crystals, chi ijk2 is not 0. And then you have this equation 13.10. Once again, they are suppressing the tensor notation and writing P simply as if it is a scalar quantity. That should not be done, but this is for simplicity only. They are writing this as if P is a scalar quantity. So anyway, what this tells you is that P has a term that is linear in E, but there is a term which is quadratic in E, and that is where the non-linearity comes in. If we could ignore the second term, then P is proportional to E, and therefore it is behaving as a linear medium. But the moment you are forced to include the second term, and you are forced to include the second term when the electric field E is very strong, of the same order of magnitude as the electric field produced by the nucleus, and then you cannot ignore the second term, and the medium behaves in a non-linear fashion. It becomes a non-linear medium. So let us move to uh, so when you have this expression 13.10, okay, just the last one that we saw, yeah, P equal to epsilon 0 chi 1 E plus epsilon 0 chi 2 E square, that expression. See, because of this E square term, you will have a cos square omega t, and this cos square omega t can be expanded as 1 plus cos 2 omega t, divided by 2. So this 2 omega comes in, and you have in the emergent beam a component with frequency twice omega. As I said, when this happens, you say that is the second harmonic has been generated, and that's how the second harmonic comes into existence because of the presence of this E square term. Okay, then we shall skip the pages and go to the next page. Yeah, skip these pages. Go to self focusing. Yes. Here is stop at this. So self focusing of light. This is another peculiar thing that happens with laser beams. When the laser beam is sufficiently intense, a peculiar thing not known to uh, the uh, uh, master uh, 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 physicists who dealt with the optical phenomena earlier, like Fresnel, uh, Fraunhofer, and so on, even Maxwell, they were not aware that such a possibility, because they always thought that the response of the medium, the polarization of the medium, would be proportional to the electric field. So uh, this self-focusing phenomenon was not um, known to them, and they did not think it's possible. But with lasers, you now have another peculiar thing arising out of nonlinear response. What is this? Let's see what happens when a very strong beam of light passes through a medium. This medium has to be a nonlinear medium. That means the uh, quantities chi2, chi3, etc. Come into play in the response characteristics of such media. So uh, now, so what we are trying to tell is that an intense parallel beam of laser beam, when it enters a non-linear medium, can cause a cause an automatic focusing of itself onto the axis of the beam. Now, to show how this happens, you first remember that the expression for the refractive index is equal to root over 1 plus chi, where chi is the susceptibility. Okay, so for low intensity beams, this chi is the same as chi 1. But if the intensity of the beam is high, then the chi that appears in the expression for refractive index is actually chi 1 plus 3 by 4. 3 by 4, this is just a second, notation. This should be uh, chi 3. Okay, this is not. So there is a mistake in the notation. 3/4 chi 3 E0 square is what it should be. Okay, just to make this correction in your write it down in your notepad, that or whatever paper you have, that 3 by 4 chi 2 should actually be 3 by 4 chi 3, because this is the one that is associated with the third harmonic. Okay,
Yes, sir.
remember that in the emergent beam, the component having frequency omega t uh, arises both from uh, the linear part, that is polari- linear part in the expression for the polarization vector, that is chi1 e, and the part that goes as chi3 e cube. So from this chi3 e cube, you have a term which is proportional to cos omega t, and together with the term that you get from chi1 e, you have this expression for p1. P1 means the uh, component of the polarization vector that goes as cos omega t. So the component that goes as cos omega t is like this: chi1 plus 3 by 4 chi3. Chi2 is mistaken notation. Then E0 square, as we have already seen, times capital E, which is the oscillatory part. So it is capital uh, E0 cos omega t. The capital E outside the brackets in equation 13.34 is actually E0 cos omega t, oscillatory part. So now the expression for the refractive index becomes square root of 1 plus, within brackets, chi1 plus 3 by 4 chi3. Kindly make this correction, it is not chi2, it should be chi3 times e0 square. Okay, and then this can be written as root over epsilon L plus epsilon NL. Why epsilon? Remember that epsilon is the permittivity of the medium. So permittivity of the medium is epsilon 0 plus epsilon 0 into chi. Okay, for linear medium you have just chi, and so epsilon is epsilon 0 into 1 plus chi. So in expression 13.33 above, you have root over 1 plus chi, and if you have a linear medium, you will have just chi1 in place of chi, and the this quantity 1 plus chi1 would be proportional to the permittivity epsilon. So actually 1 plus chi or 1 plus chi1 is equal to epsilon by epsilon 0. Now in writing the equation 13.36, just scroll down, scroll down. Yeah, what is meant by epsilon L is actually epsilon by epsilon 0, because the refractive index goes as square root of the permittivity, square root of epsilon. So they have written it like square root of epsilon L plus epsilon NL, but remember that refractive index is a dimensionless quantity, whereas permittivity has a dimension, is a dimensionful quantity. So what they actually mean epsilon L and epsilon NL are the quantities that you obtain by dividing epsilon by epsilon 0. They have not written epsilon 0, but it should be there. So you can also sort of write down that whatever is written as epsilon L is actually epsilon L by epsilon 0. Similarly, epsilon NL is epsilon NL by epsilon 0. To be absolutely correct, you should write like this. So anyway, uh, so you have in equation 13.35 square root of 1 plus chi1 plus 3 by 4 chi3 e0 square, and also you can write this as square root of epsilon L plus epsilon NL, so that epsilon L is 1 plus chi1. Remember once again that this is not the permittivity, but permittivity divided by epsilon 0. Similarly, epsilon NL, which is actually epsilon NL by epsilon 0, is equal to 3 by 4 chi 3, not chi 2, into E0 square. Okay, and so this is a nonlinear increment in the expression for dielectric permittivity. Okay, So let us move to the next equation. So they write it out. This is just simple algebra. You can follow this. Okay. Because epsilon NL is very small compared to epsilon L, you can sort of expand the square root and write like this. So just move to the next page. Yeah. So then they are writing. Yeah. Stop. Now they are taking square root of epsilon L outside the bracket, but square root of epsilon L can be written as just eta n, just eta L. Okay. So square root of epsilon L is just eta L. I can see the top portion. Just lower it slightly. Yeah, yeah. Okay. And this is written as eta L into 1 plus 3. Once again, it should be chi 3 E0 square by 8 eta L square, like that. And finally, in equation 13.440, you have eta equal to eta L into 1 plus eta NL E0 square. So, so the so you have a term like this, eta L into eta NL into E0 square, right? In the expression for the refractive index, you have a term that is just eta L and a term that is eta L into eta NL into E0 square. And that term is actually 3 chi 3, it should be chi 3 E0 square by 8 into square root of 1 plus chi 1. So that is the expression for that. Now, now comes the physics part. The physics part is like this. As we have noted very early in this course, the intensity of the laser beam is not uniform over its cross section. The intensity has a Gaussian profile. We have mentioned this earlier. We have given the expression for the intensity distribution. It has a Gaussian profile. It is most intense at the center of the beam, that is along the axis, and falls off as you move towards the peripheral regions of the beam. What it means is that the amplitude of the electric field associated with the central portion of the laser beam is larger than the amplitude of the electric field associated with the peripheral region. E0 on the axis is larger than E0 in the peripheral regions. If that be the case, then the correction term is large in the central region but not so large in the peripheral region. The refractive index is larger in this central region of the nonlinear medium and less so in the peripheral region. As the beam travels into the non-linear medium, the portion near the center of the incident beam behaves as if it has a higher refractive index than the portion that lies in the peripheral region. And then what happens? I have tried to explain with the help of another hand-drawn figure. Just go to the other hand-drawn figure. Okay, move to the next hand-drawn figure. Just figure. Yes, yes. Just reduce it in size. Okay, reduce the size. Reduce the size. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Slightly more than that. Yeah, here it is. So at the left, I have drawn a vertical line. This represents the wavefront of the incident beam before it falls on the nonlinear medium. Okay, like say quartz or whatever. It can be carbon disulfide, whatever. So, so it falls there. Okay. Remember that a medium will behave non-linearly if chi 3 is non. Notice one thing. A nonlinear medium produces two effects. One effect is the generation of second harmonic and third harmonic and so on. The other effect is what we are discussing now, that is self focusing. In connection with self focusing, you do not worry about second harmonic or third harmonic generation. You are focused on the first or fundamental harmonic. The frequency is omega, the frequency of the incident ray, no change in that. But because the medium behaves as if it has different refractive indices in different regions of the incident beam, you have this situation um, um, cropping up. So you have this incident beam which was traveling through a linear medium, and it was uh, is a parallel beam with a uh, plane wave front that is represented by the vertical line. Suppose we are considering the situation at t equal to 0, and the beam is the we are considering the wave front that falls on the nonlinear medium at time t equal to 0. Then the peripheral uh, region of the beam passes through point C, where the refractive index is less because the amplitude of the electric field in the peripheral region is smaller, and therefore the refractive index is less. On the other hand, the electric field in the central region, represented by point marked A, is strong, and therefore the refractive index is large or larger. So as the refractive index is smaller in the peripheral region, the velocity of light is larger there, whereas because the refractive index is large in the central region, the velocity of light is smaller. So light, as it passes into the nonlinear medium, proceeds with a smaller velocity along the axis of the beam, but proceeds with a faster velocity in the peripheral region. So what happens to the wavefront? The wavefront is the surface over which you have the same phase everywhere. Now, because the peripheral portion of the beam travels faster, therefore it travels larger distance in a given interval of time delta t than the central region. So how can then you have a surface with a constant phase? You can have a surface with a constant phase if the surface becomes curved. Hello, hello,
Yes, sir. Your voice is not clear, sir.
can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
This is very important. You must tell me whether you can hear me clearly or not. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what I am trying to tell you is that the let us talk in terms of rays. The peripheral ray travels a larger distance than the central ray in a given interval of time delta t. So, what must be the shape of the um wave front after time delta t? It has to be such that the point uh, which the peripheral ray reaches lies at a larger distance from point C than the point which the central ray reaches. So that can only happen if the wavefront becomes concave as shown. As you can see, the distance CD, which is, can you see clearly? The distance CD, you
Yes,
can
sir.
easily see from the diagram, is larger than AB. The distance CD is C by mu1 times delta t. Mu1 is the refractive index in the peripheral region, and this is larger than AB, which is C by mu2 into delta t, mu2 being the refractive index in the central region. So the wavefront has become concave, and this concave wavefront gradually collapses into a point which is the focal point. When a lens, for example, focuses a parallel beam to a point, the wavefront converges to that point like it's a collapsing spherical wave. So exactly the same thing is happening here. The wavefront has become concave, and as delta t increases, the concavity becomes more and more, and ultimately it becomes a circle of zero radius. That is where the focal point is, which is written as O. So the laser beam has managed to focus itself. This is not expected for light of ordinary intensity. This does not happen. It is happening here because the medium is behave in a non-linear fashion. Because in the expression for the refractive index, you have a term which is proportional to the square of the magnitude of the or amplitude of the electric field. So if the electric field's magnitude varies from point to point in the medium, because the amplitude of the field is different in the central region and in the peripheral region, the refractive index changes from peripheral to central in such a way that the wavefront becomes curved and ultimately collapses to a point, which is the focal point. So the laser beam manages to focus itself. There were people at some point of time who thought that this represents the uh, effect of a fifth type of force of nature, that is strong, weak, electromagnetic and gravitation are not the only types of force. There is a fifth type of force which is causing the self-focusing of the laser beam. But then Bloembergen and others explained the phenomenon in a much more uh, physically acceptable way by pointing out that the medium behaves in a non-linear fashion. That's why self-focusing is occurring. So these are the two peculiar things that you do not see with ordinary light. Firstly, the generation of harmonics, second, third, maybe fourth. Nobody has seen a fourth harmonic. People have seen up to third harmonic. But the other one that uh, happens with intense laser beams is self-focusing. So that is all that we have for this course. And in the lower portion, let's go back to the pages of the book. Yes, here. So in the lower portion of this page, yeah, lower portion of this page, come to equation 13.42. They are giving you an expression for the focal length. The length within the medium over which focusing is occurring. That is the distance from A to O in our diagram. The distance from A to O is given by, just show the equation 13. Yeah, the raise this. Yeah, this one. This is the uh, stop here. Yeah. So this L0 is the focal length. Some people call this the trapping length. Trapping length. As if the beam of light is trapped within this length. So L0 is what we shall call the focal length. It is given by D. D is the diameter of the incident parallel beam, and it is D by square root of eta nl into E0 square. So as we have just if you just uh, go to the upper portion of this page. Yeah, more so. Yeah, more. Yeah, here, stop. You have this expression eta equal to eta L into 1 plus eta NL E0 square. So because 1 is dimensionless, eta NL into E0 square is also dimensionless quantity. This is the thing that I wanted to point out. So now if you go back to the expression for L0, you see that just lower it, uh, expression for L0, just raise it slightly. Yes, here. So here in the denominator you have root over eta nl into e0 square, which is a dimensionless quantity. Therefore L0 has the same dimension as d, and d's diameter has the dimension of length. So everything is okay. The only thing that I want to point out is that this expression misses certain numerical factors. So this is not exactly right. It's correct up to some numerical factor, small numerical factor. And in the last equation of this chapter, they say that this phenomenon is seen only when the intensity of the incident beam exceeds a certain threshold value, which is given by lambda square by eta L square eta nl d square. So it means that if you have an incident beam of smaller wavelength, that is higher frequency, and a larger diameter, that is d, the threshold is lower. So the smaller lambda is and the larger the diameter of the beam is, the self-focusing phenomenon would be more easier to observe. Okay. Once again, 13.43 misses certain numerical factors, which is not important from a strictly, this is not important from a physical understanding of the thing, but of course for comparison with experimental data you will also need these numerical factors. Once again, notice one thing. I am telling you all this so that you are always conscious of the dimensions of the quantities. I say that I is intensity. How do I know that it is intensity? So intensity is proportional to the electric field squared, right? But you also have the velocity of light and epsilon 0 and so on. So remember that eta nl times E0 square is dimensionless. That means eta nl has the dimension of 1 by E0 square. So if you keep that in mind, then you have a quantity on the right hand side whose dimension is dimension of lambda square into dimension of square of the electric field divided by dimension of diameter square. The dimension of lambda square is L square, dimension of diameter square is L square. So this cancel out and you are left with a quantity which is having the dimension of square of the electric field. So as you expect, intensity is proportional to square of the electric field, but then as I said, certain numerical factors are missing. What are these factors? These are epsilon 0 and c, because without that you will not have intensity. Now then you may ask me, where do I find these factors epsilon 0 and c? Where do I find the correct expressions? So for that I will refer you to a book written again by Ghotak and Loknathan. This book has the title Contemporary Optics. If you are really curious about this phenomenon of self-focusing and so on, you can read the details in the book Contemporary Optics by Ghotak and Tyagarajan. Okay, so Ghotak and Tyagarajan have a book on lasers fundamentals and applications, and they also have a more advanced book on optics called Contemporary Optics, where detailed derivations of these expressions for this focal length and threshold of intensity are worked out. If you are really interested, you can look up that book, Contemporary Optics by Ghotak and Tyagarajan. If anybody among you is interested in working on uh, optical phenomena like laser Raman spectroscopy, etc., he may consult that book, Contemporary Optics, for not only this phenomenon but also for holography, also for Fourier optics and so on, which are the modern topics in optics. So I strongly recommend that book, Contemporary Optics, but please don't bother to go through this book unless you have a very strong interest in optics. Okay, for your examination, what we have studied up to this point of time or up to today is enough. Okay, so this is the end of the course as far as the examination is concerned, but of course you can uh, go on studying various aspects of lasers and their applications and so on. There's infinite number almost, and several Nobel Prizes have been awarded over the years for progressively developing the subject of laser. I would send you one more note. I will not take a class on the subject matter of that note, but this note would be only to introduce you to certain uh, terms used in connection with lasers like mode locking, mode pulling, and hole burning. These are terms which laser physics people often use, and I will send you some pages from this very book, Lord, where these topics are discussed briefly. So you can keep this in your file just for reference. Uh, these topics will not form part of the syllabus for the examination. Okay. So thank you so much. This is as far as the course on lasers is concerned. If you have any questions or discuss anything, just fix up a time on some day and we can discuss those things. But this is the this is the last lecture for this course on lasers. Okay.